the bookshop, it's the bookshop, it's the bookshop of Beverly Farms.
Happy New Year, everybody. This is Sam Feifel, your host of John Updike's Ghost, your favorite little podcast about reading, writing, literature, bookstores, what we got from Santa under the tree, and all things awesome. And I am joined, as always, here in the new year by the co-owner of the bookshop of Beverly Farms, my sister, and all-around great present giver, Hannah Harlow. How are you doing today, Hannah?
I'm wonderful. I'm here in the bookshop, which is pretty quiet today on December 30th.
Yes, it's not quite the new year yet, but it will be when you hear this. That was the point.
Right, correct.
It's a way to steal my thunder there. That's nice.
Sorry. And speaking of great gift giving, you were the only one brave enough to give me a book.
I did. I promised you last year that I would do so, and I delivered on that promise.
You did. It was excellent. I think I cried a little bit.
Well, you know, I am a thoughtful gift giver, despite the fact that I screw it up from time to time. Many funny stories.
I ran into some issues this Christmas, but not with my present.
Not with yours. No, I nailed yours.
As we talked about on the last episode, Sam had recently read The Age of Innocence. And in the podcast, we talked about how much I love that book. And Sam's gift to me was our grandfather's copy of The Age of Innocence, which was lovely.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm happy that you have it. And it's a great little legacy for us to have. Not everybody is so lucky to have so many things passed down generations.
Right.
And we are very lucky in that way.
And this is when I realized how excellent our grandfather's handwriting was.
He was very fastidious in his handwriting, for sure.
And in things in general.
Exactly. Yes. He was a little bit of a tight ass is really what he was.
Yeah.
But he did have a beautiful signature. So we are going to talk a little bit about the books we have been giving to each other for Christmas, along with whatever it is we're reading. I am all cards on the table, only a little bit concussed after a little skiing accident. So if my train of thought is stranger than normal, you probably won't notice, but maybe there will be some delays in cognition.
You're keeping us on task. I forgot about the agenda, and I can see that's where you're going.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I was about
Very
to
impressed.
lead into the agenda. I have three books on my agenda, three little slim tomes, and actually, I didn't get any of them for Christmas. My TBR pile now is amazing for Christmas, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But on my agenda are three books. One is Anti-Semite and Jew by Jean-Paul Sartre. One is The Forever War by Joe Haldeman. And the last one is an ARC for a book that I think is going to be important, coming out in January, by Nicholas Carr, called Superbloom: How Technologies of Connection Tear Us Apart. What is on your agenda?
I'm just going to talk about two books today. The first one is Playground by Richard Powers.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Yep. And the second one is Heir by Sabaa Tahir. That is Heir.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have read that. I've read the first two books of that Sabaa trilogy.
Ember in the Ashes, I believe, has 4 books.
Oh, there's 4 books in that? I only made it through the first 2 because I thought they were kind of dreadful. And so I decided not to read book 3.
I read the first 3 before I soured on them. I don't think I read the 4th one. I really liked the first one.
Yeah, I thought the first one was all right. And the second one was just dreadful.
That was a Kenny special. That was sold to me by Kenny in Farmington, Maine, one summer before we owned our bookstore.
DDG Books.
Yep, DDG Books. And I went back for book 2 that same week. I was like, book 1, done. Let's go get book 2. Got to have it. And then I think we had to wait for book 3 to publish. So, whenever these books were coming out, we were kind of, Kenny was on top of it, of course.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. All right, we'll talk about that in a second. I did want to talk a little bit about gift giving of books at Christmas time. So bookstore owners have come across this idea of the Icelandic Christmas Book Flood, also known as Jólabókaflóðið or something. And it seems to be very commercialized. Instagrammers have taken something that is actually just like a publishing tradition. The publishers bring out their big books at Christmas time in Iceland because everybody does that. And it's called like the, Christmas Book Flood because lots of books come out. That's turned into like this Instagramming thing where like the, mythical people of Iceland or like, book lovers from another planet or something. We don't have to go quite that deep into it, but it has occurred to me that, there's really not that much stuff you can give to people, unless you're like major consumerist and you have small children or whatever. At Christmas time, music is completely off the table now, right? Like nobody gives music anymore because everybody just has Spotify. Nobody gives like DVDs or movies anymore, which totally used to be a thing. Nobody gives video games really anymore because you just download them and stuff. So books are one of the last thing that you can like give to people and show that you sort of care about their interior life, And I thought it kind of played out. That's a great point. Little family, I loved, like Ruby, my daughter, is studying to be a doctor in philosophy, and she like gave philosophy books to
I love that.
Everybody, as a way to like
very
share
thoughtful.
Her passion. And like, she gave Dad that Daniel Dennett book, and Daniel Dennett is like one of the most famous philosophers. He just died last year.
And a Mainer.
As a Mainer as of like 2018. But he taught a tough
not lifelong.
Not like a Mainer, but
not a Mainer. He lived in Maine.
Right. Ended up being Mainer-like at the end. But, Tufts University professor for like 40 years or whatever. Yeah. And I just thought that was really cool. And, like I gave you Grandpa's book and, I always make a book list. So it's never really a big surprise when I get books. But, I love getting... even though we own a bookstore, I love getting books from people because it's like, yes, this is what I want to read, the new REM book badly,
I used to do a book list. I've kind of given up on that because I don't know. I just buy the books in the store that I want. But I gave my family cookbooks this year.
Right.
Which I think, is another way to go. Like it doesn't have to be a reading book necessarily. And I've been wanting to encourage my teen sons to cook so that they can cook for themselves when they go off into the world.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Wells, he got the ramen book.
He got a book called Let's Make Ramen. And I will say I also wrote about this in my cricket article for the Manchester newspaper, local paper. Mm-hmm. And I listed the cookbooks I was buying for my family, but then I also kind of looked at all the cookbooks, the big cookbooks of the fall.
Did this piece publish before Christmas?
It did.
You gave away the presents you were giving your family in the newspaper before they opened them under the tree?
They don't read the paper.
Wow.
It's not our town.
I don't know. I can't even. Wow.
They didn't know.
What if Santa saw? I'm very shocked by this revelation.
Anyway, we got the most phone calls about Let's Make Ramen. That was the winner.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. And ramen is very popular with the kids these days. Ruby and Gus are both big ramen eaters for sure.
Yep. And then Huck got the Chili Crisp cookbook.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Which, you have to really like that condiment to want the cookbook. But
yeah, that seems gross to me, actually. I don't think I got a cookbook from you.
You didn't. You got the Grateful Dead book.
I know. Right. Because I don't really want food books anyway.
And I've been last year I gave you a Grateful Dead Christmas ornament. So
right. That's right. The Jerry Garcia. I saw.
I'm staying on theme.
Just saw him on the tree. Yes, I got the Lost novel by Robert Hunter, who is the lyricist for the Grateful Dead.
Which we now predict will be probably pretty bad, but that's
probably
okay.
Pretty bad. He wrote it when he was 17 years old back in the late 50s, early 60s, and it's probably terrible, but
But long lost.
Yeah, and sometimes you need to read weird stuff. So I'm very much looking forward to it.
Great. And so
let's see. But so anyway, I didn't really get any of these books, but maybe I'll start with
Wait, can I go back to the Icelandic Book Flood?
I'm sorry. Yes.
Just to say, yes, we've turned into that to like the mythical Icelandic people really love books. But the tradition was in Iceland, they would read on Christmas Eve. Like they give each other books and then like sit and read.
Right. I think that's the Instagram version.
You don't think that really happened?
The research I did said no.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. It said like, that's what the Instagrammers have turned it into, but really it's just, they give each other books.
They just give each other books on Christmas because everybody
That's just a common present. There's something that it goes back to like World War II because there was like rationing and they had lots of wood. And so paper wasn't rationed. Oh. And so for a while, books became a common present because it was a thing that they could acquire relatively easily. Wow.
Okay.
Yeah. But no, it's not like some sort of like ancient tradition or anything.
That's too bad.
That's what I mean about the Instagramification of the story. It got like,
I see.
Hallmark carded, but I don't think it really happened that way. But I mean, we all read books when we give them to each other. So,
Yeah, sure. Okay. Anyway, let's talk about some books we've actually read.
So for instance, I, because my daughter is a philosophy doctoral student, I've been picking up random philosophy texts when I come across them. And I was down that goes all the way back to the Savannah trip, and I was in a used bookstore in Savannah.
I was going to say, this book looks coffee stained.
Oh, yeah. No, it's really beat up. It's called Anti-Semite and Jew by Jean-Paul Sartre. And it was written, actually, really amazingly in October of 1944. So right at the end of the war, he was writing. He lived for a while in Germany during the war, and he lived in Paris during the war. And, so this was owned originally by a guy named Jack Kay in 1992. It got reissued by Grove Press. And it's translated by George Becker. It really speaks to our current time period, this idea of anti-Semitism and, what's going on in Gaza and Palestine. And without getting too far into that, it's really interesting to see this historical document because this easily could have been written like yesterday. In terms of, he talks about the liberal Democrat and how sometimes the liberal Democrat can be just as bad as the far right winger because they don't do anything to stop it. They just say nice words, right? And it's just, I don't want to get too far into it. I don't think there's anybody who's like arguing in favor of anti-Semitism. But what Sartre really does an amazing job of is talk about the way it plays out in society and how people take it on as an identity when they don't have any other sort of identity available to them. And just really for you deconstructionists out there, he's writing this before, deconstructionism, but he really talks a lot about the need for people to have an other and just like the othering of, we cannot be ourselves unless there is an other that we can reflect against. Not going to really encourage people to like go try and find a copy of this, but I think, because I'm going to get into it with Superbloom, but it's this type of thing, like where we reach this sort of ahistorical period where nobody can remember anything, and every argument is like brand new, and every argument needs to be made in 280 characters or whatever. And it's like, there's a perfectly good treatise on anti-Semitism from 1944 that, is available to us and is much more interesting than like the garbage that gets put out with no thought behind it whatsoever. And, we don't always need new things. I think it's important for us to like remember that these texts exist. So mostly this is an encouragement for people to just go read something that was written more than 50 years ago and see how the experience takes you, and read something nonfiction, because it's striking how these same arguments just get made over and over and over again. We keep having the same conversation.
Yeah. I think I struggle with that in the bookstore of just, we are a bookstore of new books, and publishing is putting out so many new books all the time that like you can't keep up. And then it's like we have only the newest books in store, except for like our little classic section or like the handful of books that we kind of rotate through that are older. And then I get caught up in trying to stay on top of all the new books coming out.
Yeah, no, it's really hard.
It's hard.
But I do think, it's like I remember when we were first talking about the classics, I was like, what makes it a classic? And basically, once they die, they get moved into...
That's what I said. Once they're dead, they move to the classic section.
But, it would be interesting to have, we don't break out the classics by section. Like the classics are all the classics, and generally they're fiction.
Right.
You never really think of classics nonfiction as much.
No. I mean, I do. There are a couple of nonfiction books that I put in there, and it's always like I have this like moment of disconnect when I'm categorizing it in our POS, because I'm like, oh, it's not, because the categorization is fiction / classics.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm like, this isn't fiction, but I want it in our classics. So I mean, I should just change the category.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are like philosophical texts, I got that cool copy of the Tao-Te-Ching translated by Ursula Guin for Ruby. And it's like, there are these texts that do exist that we do keep referencing.
Right.
And, I feel like there's no middle ground. It's either from, antiquity or yesterday, and it's like, what is a classic of media criticism? Like Marshall McLuhan, right? I keep referencing them around the house. Nobody's ever heard of Marshall McLuhan, but he's like, the dude who coined the phrase, the media is the message, one of the early ages of TV. And like, his text on media consumption is a classic and informs all these other, social media discussions that we're having right now. But it's really hard to find, right?
Right.
There are those presses that bring like classics back into print. Are there presses that bring classics of nonfiction back into print? I don't even know. Like old academic texts, or I don't know.
That's a good question. I don't know. Maybe we should take that on. Just kidding.
Yeah. Well, that was funny because who's the dude? Art Spiegelman, who did Mouse. His next graphic novel is going to be on Gaza and Palestine.
Oh, wow.
And I saw he was like on Blue Sky saying like, oh, this is my next book. I'm worried I won't be able to find a publisher for it, which is insane. Someone will publish it. Don't worry about it.
Right.
But I wanted to be like, we'll publish it. Like, it's not hard, man.
Right.
Like, I'm pretty sure I can get you, in print and distributed without that much effort. And you're Art Spiegelman. I'm assuming someone will step up. But he's concerned that, his topic is too political or whatever. And I just can't imagine that. Seems like he's got the bona fides.
It seems like it. But on the other hand, I'm like, I could see him getting turned down everywhere because everyone's just like, yeah, nobody really cares anymore. And there's no name recognition anymore unless you have 5 million followers on TikTok or whatever.
I'll follow up with him in a couple of weeks. If he's
great.
Publisher, I will say that Books LLC would be happy to publish his next work.
All right. Well, my book has no segue. Playground by Richard Powers.
Mm-hmm.
So,
no segue whatsoever. There's got to be a segue.
Well, I guess just a lot of what we're talking about, like media consumption and how people get their information, social media, just like all of that gets tackled. He covers a lot of ground. Yeah, it's fiction.
Yeah.
But it follows kind of 3 characters for the most part. And one of the main characters has built this, incredibly successful social media platform, and he's a billionaire.
Oh, no.
And so you're kind of going back in time and getting his history of like this friendship that was really integral into like kind of creating the company, right? Like these 2 friends used to play all these games. They were super competitive. They were kind of like the 2 smartest kids in the school. And they started playing chess, and then they started playing Go.
Oh, yeah.
And they just were constantly arguing kind of like the other friend was like a, poet and English major and just like constantly consuming texts and fiction. And he was sort of like anti-technology. Mm-hmm. So they're always arguing about like, can a computer eventually win Go the way they kind of eventually won chess, right?
Right. I think they did recently, right? Is that
I don't know.
I think so. I can't remember.
Okay. Anyway, then like there's another storyline that's taking place on like a Polynesian island.
Aha.
And you're like, okay, like there's just this family and there's a woman kind of making a work of art out of all the like trash that washes up on the island. And you're also seeing like the mayor grappling with this issue because of an American company wants to come and use this island as their base of operations to build floating cities.
Oh. Okay.
And so the islanders have to vote whether they want this or not, right? And they're super poor. There are 80 people on the island who live on this island.
Right.
And they've been burned by the white man before, right? They used to do a mining company. Mm-hmm. So they're like, okay, well, can we do this better this time and get their money? Or do we want to just like preserve the way of life that we have, which is like really super great, actually.
But probably sinking.
But sinking and like, yeah, wouldn't it be nice to have maybe more food or like, more things? I
guess.
Yeah. Wow. That's part of the argument of like, do you need more things?
I don't want any more things.
And then there's this other storyline of this woman who's, she's like a diver and like a marine biologist.
Wow.
And she's based on a real person in real life or whatever. Wow. But one of the things I liked about the book was time is super fluid. Like, there aren't really chapter breaks. So you just keep kind of moving into like different stories. And it's really? Like, you're getting this like marine biologist story and like you realize after a page or two that it's like the 1950s or, and then you're like, and when you come back to it, you're like, oh, okay, now we've moved on in her story. Now it's the 60s. Like you just kind of like figure out when you are.
Yeah. It's not confusing and frustrating.
It's not confusing and frustrating. It's really well done. Like he just gives you enough markers to like figure out when you are and like which story you're in and when it's happening. And so I started this book months ago and put it down. And then people started coming to the store recently and they were like, oh my God, that ending, did you read it? And I was like, no.
I didn't finish it.
I didn't finish it. So I wanted to see what they meant because there is this kind of wow ending that, and I love this. I love these kind of books where you get to the end and makes you rethink like the whole book and everything you've read. And that totally happened. So I will say it had a slow start, and that's the feedback I got from other people. They were like, go back and try again. So you do have to like get into it because the storylines don't really come together for a long time. And so you have to kind of get into each storyline and like be prepared to like leave it for a while and go to this other one. But eventually it gets like super good. And it's, he wrote the overstory, which was about trees. So this is kind of doing for the ocean what the overstory did for trees.
Yeah,
so
he's on a good run.
Yeah. Makes you really appreciate kind of the ocean. There's just a lot of love and joy.
How come Bewilderment didn't sell as well?
Bewilderment was just a little bit different. I loved that book, but it was super sad.
Oh, really?
It was, I don't know if you read Flowers for Algernon.
I did. Who has not? Yeah.
It was kind of a retelling that like follows the same kind of storyline.
Oh, really? Where like a mentally handicapped person becomes intelligent and then goes back in the other direction?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. So it was something. So
sorry if I just ruined Flowers for Algernon.
You did just ruin it. Yeah. So it's a father-son story. The mother has passed away, and there's a little bit of science fiction here where they're like, at the university, they've discovered how to use like the mother's, I don't know what, to kind of help her son who has these like emotional, like an emotional disorder. Like he can't control, whatever.
Right. So you think that's what it was? It just wasn't happy, feel good?
Yeah.
Interesting. Because Flowers for Algernon on the books Reddit is often cited as one of the greatest books ever.
It's really good. I mean, it's a classic. Just
think,
the way
people have decided it's problematic, I think now, but
probably, but I think the writing, like the achievement of showing somebody
right
through writing, getting kind of gradually increasingly more quote unquote intelligent,
right,
and then slowly losing it. Like, that's really hard to do.
Yeah, if hours from now, John pulls it off.
And I think the same thing in Bewilderment.
Yeah.
Like,
okay.
It's not narrated by the son, right? It's narrated by the father, I think.
Okay, yeah.
Maybe it's just the third person. I can't remember. I read it a while ago. But, you go on this up the hill and then you come back down the hill. Yeah. And it's not a happy ending.
Yeah. Because it's, the origin story sold really well for us. But then, I guess Playground had a big run. It actually did well in December. We sold out of it. So,
yeah,
it's one of those books I kind of forgot about. Like, it should be a big book.
It should be. I think it should be bigger than it has been.
I mean, it's number 23 in the system, so it's pretty big. But
right, but I just think people kind of weren't paying attention, and so then once the holidays came, it was like, okay, yeah, and now people are.
I think it'll probably it'll be a little bit like Northwoods, which had like a
It might have a longer tail than some of these other books. Yeah, I really liked it. So I mean, it just covers a ton of ground where you keep thinking, oh, this is a book about the ocean, or this is a book about whatever, and then it just keeps bringing more elements that all work together.
I like it. It leads right into, there's actually quite a good transition here into Superbloom. By Nicholas Carr. I actually am not really familiar with Nicholas Carr. He wrote a book called The Shallows, which was a Pulitzer Prize finalist. He's a former executive editor of the Harvard Business Review. He writes for The Atlantic. He lives in Williamstown, Massachusetts. Actually, maybe we should invite him to do an event.
Okay.
Because I think this book, I mean, I don't know if anybody reads this kind of thing anymore. It's probably a little bit academic-y, but because it reads like a long Atlantic article, really.
Well, I think those are good events because then people are like, well, I'll just go to the event and it'll be like reading the book.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot to talk about and it's very topical. So what he does is goes through the history of communication types and talks about how, as sort of documented by media commentators and sociologists for centuries now, literally, that human society is reshaped by the technologies it has available to them to communicate, right? So, it makes sort of intuitive common sense in that, when there was no way to communicate other than face-to-face, societies were super tight. You had no idea what was going on the other side of the hill or whatever, because all you had was what was in front of you. It's very immediate. Time is not important. It's what it is what it is. And then we got more and more ways to communicate. We could write things down. All of a sudden, ideas could be shared across societies. You could be influenced by people you've never met. Then we create the printing press, which mass produces these ideas. And there's all sorts of funny revelations that are not really that deep, but they're great things to think about. Like Martin Luther, basically the world's first influencer, because he took advantage of the fact that the printing press allowed him to, create his 95 theses and, spread them far and wide. And all of a sudden, you had yourself a celebrity. So then we get radio, then we get TV, then, or the telegraph, or, all these different ways, right? And what's
so he goes through all of those, but
he goes through them pretty quickly, because he's getting to the present day. But what he documents with each one, and I think the real insight that it provides is that every time one of these new communication technologies is invented, everybody rushes to talk about what a great thing it's going to be for democracy and society, right? The more we know about each other, the more empathy we're going to have, the harder it will be to have war, right? The guy who invented the telegraph was like, oh, well, this is going to end war forever because we're going to be able to, just talk it out so easily, right? Like, how could you ever have war again when you can communicate this efficiently? And then basically it presaged the most violent century in human history, which is the 1900s with World War I and II and Vietnam and all that crap. But every time, it's like they're echoes of each other, right? Oh, TV is we're going to be able to see each other, social media, right? And because Zuckerberg, his famous treatise in 2012 about how the news feed was going to, basically a super society of democracy, right? And it's done the exact opposite. Right. And every single time it's done the exact opposite. No communication technology has ever brought us closer together. It's actually fractured us more and more and more. Wow. And so what he goes through is to try to figure out why this is. What is it about human evolution and psychology that would make this true? Why is it that all of our grand ambitions and statements about the democratizing nature of communication is always wrong, right? And there's some really interesting shit. And the sort of most interesting thing is it's basically well documented that the more we know about people, the less likely we are to like them. Wow. And when you start to think about it again, it makes sense, right? So you start off not knowing anything and you're sort of neutral, right? Mm-hmm. And then each thing you learn, right, is one more opportunity to see that person as the other, right? Hey, you grew up in Massachusetts? Me too. Oh, you grew up on the South Shore? I'm on the North Shore. Oh, you must be one of those Southie weirdos. It's as soon as you get that extra piece of information, it's one more opportunity for them to be in the other tribe. Right. And so now, instead of knowing more about everybody, creating this pool of empathy, it's created countless data points for us to decide that they are not in our tribe. Right. And so, and people are always wondering, how come the woman having coffee on the back deck with her husband, how did she become evil? Right. Do you remember that social phenomenon or whatever?
I actually don't. I think I missed this. But...
Yeah. So there's some woman was this is the life, having coffee with my husband on a Saturday afternoon on the back deck. Right. And, the first 10
you're
minutes.
So privileged, blah,
yes,
blah, blah.
Exactly. First 10 minutes, everybody's like. And then somebody's like, oh, must be nice not to have to work on a Saturday afternoon. Must be nice to have a husband. Must be nice.
Must be nice to have a back deck.
Right. Exactly. Right. You can't have any moral authority unless you live in a fucking basement hovel, with no 2 pennies to scrape together. Right. It's ridiculous. Yeah. And so people wonder about that. How come, there's always this mob that comes for people? And it's literally the way our brains are designed to react to this kind of stimuli. Right. The more you tell us about yourself, the less we are to like you. And so there's all sorts of insights. I'm not going to give away the whole book, but what he's arguing pretty persuasively is that we're doing this to ourselves, right? We love to tell this story about humanity because we all want to believe that humanity is good. And the more we know about each other, the more we are, oh, wow, I'm going to like this person.
Well, and that whatever we're doing is progress.
Right. Yes. Always,
maybe it's not.
Maybe it's not progress. That's what he's saying is that, we're sort of blindly accepting the story that we tell about ourselves that, if humans made it, it must be good and it must lead to more good humans. But there's no evidence for that in any way. So it's a really it's an important book. People need to understand.
It sounds really good. And reminding me of how we've talked about the fact that we know social media is bad. And we can't get rid of it. We don't stop using it.
Yeah. Well, I think what we're trying to do is use it tactically and understand the way it's working against us, right? It's basically cognitive behavioral theory for social media, where, if you have an awareness of the type of reactions it's likely to create in you, you're better able to sort of combat them and not allow them to, but it still happens, I go on Blue Sky now, and all of these bookstores are friends with each other, and I see something going on in another bookstore. I'm like, screw that bookstore. How come they get to have that awesome thing?
Right,
You know?
totally.
And then I'm like,
Yes.
whoa, dude, what are you doing?
Yes.
Like, it looks like an awesome thing. Why would I not think it's awesome?
Why can't we just be happy for them that they got it?
Yeah.
Or they're doing it, or it works for them.
Right. It inspires this jealousy or whatever for reasons that are just super unclear. Yeah. But I think that's why, because I don't think social media is going away. We're not going to have fewer ways to communicate with each other. But if you are much more aware of why you're having these emotional reactions to these messages that you're getting,
you can,
I think
moderate them,
navigate it much better. Yeah. And I think it's just like it's a media literacy text, you know?
Yeah.
And I haven't actually, I've gotten through like the first few sections. There's a final section where I'm assuming he's going to have some policy ideas that I haven't got to yet.
Right. Definitely.
But I think that's the other thing is, we used to regulate things so much more tightly.
Yes, can we please regulate things?
Yeah,
more?
when the phone came out, they're like, there's this awesome section about like when radio. So when radio came out, it was like social media, right? Like the Boy Scouts were actually the first ones to like really dive into radio, and it was like a Boy Scout thing that you would make your own radio and broadcast to other people who have radios, and all radios were both receivers and broadcasters. Right. And it became chaos because there's like 50 zillion, nobody could talk because everybody's using the same. So then they had like 4 months worth of hearings where they hashed out, how are we going to regulate radio and who's going to get to decide and what's going to be the law, da, 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 da. And then like 10 years later, they were like, oh my God, that was super stupid. And they did the same thing again and created a new Federal Communications Commission because, like it hadn't been regulated correctly. And we basically don't regulate social media.
Right.
In any way.
Right.
And
now
crazy.
that the companies are so big and have so much money, the hope of regulation is kind of long gone. Like, how are we ever going to regulate now?
I don't know.
When freaking Elon Musk is our president.
He is somewhat resistant to regulation, famously. Well, let's not get too negative.
Let's not get too political.
We don't know what the future will hold. It might be awesome.
Right.
But anyway, you should read that. We should let's invite this guy. See if we can reach out to him.
Okay,
that would be really cool. He would be like a legit Hastings House thing, I think.
Okay, great. I'm working on it. Actually, so I wrote it down.
I got a sidebar.
Okay.
So I went to go find out when Daniel Dennett died because I couldn't remember, and I found this Down East article about him from 2023, which is right before he died. And do you know who wrote that Down East article?
Paul Dryden.
No, Rachel Slade, the woman who wrote Making It in America, who was our last
that makes more sense.
At Hastings House. Isn't that cool?
Yes.
It shows how small New England is. But all right, what's your second book?
It's Heir by Sabaa Tahir.
That's right.
So
YA.
It's YA fantasy. I actually moved this into adult. I was.
Oh, you did, yeah? Because it's kind of porny, isn't it?
It's a little porny. Yeah. And I saw no reason for it to be in young adult. I listened to it, and listening to it, I got halfway through and I was like, I'm going to move this because, our YA section, perhaps to its detriment, or maybe just YA is tough anyway. Right. It's in our kids' room. I think it doesn't get as shopped much as it should get shopped. So I felt like Heir living in there was going to die a slow death. So I brought it into the adult section. And, I really, honestly, I don't know why it's YA.
Right. I mean, they're all adults. Yeah.
They're all adults.
Yeah.
And they're all doing adult things.
Yeah. There's no 14-year-olds. Yeah.
So anyway,
I can't remember. Is this the one that's like Latin American kind of flavored, like Chilean history?
I don't think so.
No, that's
nope.
That's not this one.
Not this one. And anyway, so
that's the one that was like the Black Crow one. Yeah.
I had, as we discussed, read some of the earlier books in the series. I did not remember them at all. You do not need to have read any of the previous books to enjoy this book. I feel like it just works on its own. But I think it benefits from the world building she's already done. So you're just put in this world and it feels really well developed and big, right? So you follow, I feel like I just said this for Playground, but you follow 3 different characters.
Is it the same characters? Are they still?
I don't think they're the same character. I didn't even go look. They're all new characters. I think it's just like a totally different time, right? Like,
right.
It's
just
either a prequel or
it's
set in the same universe.
Gotcha.
But you open with like a young woman who was an orphan. She's from a slum, and the people in power treat the kind of orphans of the slum very poorly, and so she's like, I need to save my people. And so she's on this kind of quest to save her people, which turns into this like kind of religious quest because a voice starts talking to her, which is apparently this like God-like figure from their myths.
Right.
So she's being helped by this magical entity. So you're following her on her quest to like save her people. And then you have this other guy who's a prince. So not totally other storyline. And, he is heir apparent to the throne. His country gets attacked. So he's suddenly at war, but like on the run because his aunt, who's the queen or whatever, they don't call her the queen, but she's like, you got to run. And so he's kind of whatever.
Capital's being overrun.
Yeah.
We can't have the heir get gacked. Yeah.
And then he teams up with this other woman's storyline that you've been following. She's been hired to track down this killer. There's a killer in the land who is killing children horrifically by like ripping out their hearts. And it seems like this is maybe another, not a human killer.
Right. Yeah.
And she has some very special abilities that make her a great tracker.
Mm-hmm.
So she has sworn an oath, actually. So if she doesn't find the killer, it's going to be very bad for her. So anyway, you have these three people on their separate missions, and like they all
come together.
Yes, and it's just like a great immersive read.
Is it like a team up, like Fellowship of the Ring style? Like we're all going to do this together, or they get thrust into the situation?
Two of them team up. Two of the three team up, I will say. Then I will say that there are some twists. There was one really good twist that I didn't see coming.
Good.
And then there is a grand deception, which was also, I thought, pretty good, because one of the characters turns into the bad guy. And you're sort of like, wait, I've been sympathizing with this character. So I thought it was it was really well done. And it's just very epic. Like they travel all over to the different lands. There's magic. There are big battles. Like I said, listen to it. So I need to go look at the book. I'm sure there's a map. I'm sure there are maps.
I love it when there's a map in the YA book.
There's definitely a map. Anyway, I just thought it was like super enjoyable. I got into it. I kept like, I had to know what happened.
I can't. I'm sorry. I'm slightly distracted because I want to find this other one that I was thinking of, but I'm not going to do it. So
with the South American.
Yeah. I got it confused. Now I remember why I gave up on that one. Because there was is there like a love story? Or no?
There is a love story.
Right,
I know.
Right.
In the previous
That's why I got distracted by it. I was like, why is there a love story in this book? Like, it was exactly what you were talking about. Like, there's plenty of other stuff going on. We've got adventure, action, people are fighting, all kinds of stuff. And then it's like, and then there's also this like weird courtship going on that took me out of the book so significantly.
I will say the love story in this book I thought was just much better integrated and well done.
Okay.
The love story in that other series was like, well, it was just too much.
Right. Yeah. It just felt bolted on was the thing for me. It's one of my big problems. Like anytime someone has been like injured badly and then there's a big fight and then they go and make out right afterwards, I'm always like, there's no way. I'm sorry. You have like a stomach wound. You are not going to be
dying.
Yeah. I mean, it's just ridiculous. It happens all the time. I'm like, that would hurt too much.
No, not the case here.
Not the case. All right. I also have speculative fiction, I guess I would say, for my last book. Another masshole, actually. Joe Haldeman is a writer. He was from Cambridge, Massachusetts. I don't know if he's still alive, to tell you the truth.
What book is this? I forget.
So this book is it's called The Forever War, and it was originally published in 1974 by Joe Haldeman. So I'm not sure if he's still alive, but basically, it's a book that I've known about for a while. It's like the science fiction war critique partner to Starship Troopers, right? In the same way that like Heinemann's Starship Troopers is like this critique of the Vietnam War. This is also a critique of the Vietnam War. I haven't read very much of it yet, but I wanted to talk about it a little bit because, I don't know, the critique still stands up. So if you haven't read Starship Troopers, you should read that. Heinemann is one of the best social critics going in the science fiction genre. And I think I don't know, I read a fair amount of science fiction, and important books like this come along pretty rarely. And so Haldeman actually was a vet. He was in Vietnam and wrote this book as a critique of the Vietnam War. The plot is that the war is with this alien race, which is like light years away. It takes like 1,000 years to get there, basically. But they have the, cryogenicism or whatever to make it so that you can get there. So you sleep, wake up, fight this war, right? But you're fighting this war for people who will not be alive or even close to it when you get back. And you have no idea what the world will be like when you get back.
Ooh.
You have no real idea what the enemy is going to be like when you get there because it's so far away. And, it's just this great sort of commentary on what we ask of our soldiers, right? We're saying, go fight this war for reasons that are super unclear. When you get back to society, it will be completely unrecognizable to you. And we're not even going to thank you for your service, really. In the case of Vietnam, we'll make you a pariah. So I'm really looking forward to
Sounds so good.
I'm really looking forward to reading it. And the reason I have it is we went to Bank Square Books in Mystic, Connecticut, which moved its location.
Right.
And so we were in Mystic, and we always go to Bank Square. So we went to the new location, which is beautiful and huge. And I wanted to support them. And they have a massive selection. And I was looking at their science fiction. And I was like, I've been meaning to buy this book. And it's a nice
So they
little...
just have a big sci-fi fantasy section?
They had
separate sci-fi from fantasy?
Separate from fantasy, yes. They had like a whole bookcase of nothing but science fiction.
And so their sci-fi is old and new? Like it's just...
Yeah, they had a great selection of classics and new stuff. And, but like a lot of the science fiction you read today, like, there's some social commentary, like in, that 8-book opus I'm reading by S.A. Corey, there's some stuff about tribalism in there and it's global politics, but, it doesn't really feel like it's speaking to right now. It just feels like it's like, people don't like the other and hey, bureaucracy is bad and, free speech and, whatever. Whereas this,
has a bit more specificity to it.
Right. And and Starship Troopers is one of my favorite books. I've read it 3-4 times. The biting satire is something that you just don't see much of now. Like I feel like there isn't
books
much
these
satirical
days,
stuff.
The description will be like, this is satire. And I'm reading it and I'm like, it is?
Right. Remember what was that book that was like, this is satire? And I was like, doesn't seem very satirical to me.
Right. I was like, does everyone know what satire is anymore? I don't know.
But
we just call like dark humor satire. And
I think people think of cynicism as satirical.
Yes, totally.
But it's, satire doesn't have to, it can be goofy, it doesn't have to be like dark. Right. Sometimes satire is really funny. I don't think The Forever War is funny, but I do think it's satirical. So anyway, I'm looking forward to reading it. I should probably look up whether Joe Haldeman is still alive.
Joe Haldeman is still alive. He was born in 1943. It looks like he's kind of retired now. He was a professor at MIT for many years.
Yeah, I knew he was in Cambridge. So anyway, it's funny how I just keep gravitating to these mass holes without even knowing they're from Massachusetts.
It is interesting.
Just a center of literary discourse, whether we like it or not. But basically, I encourage people to go to big bookstores and go to their science fiction section and pick out something from the 70s, and you will be happy about it.
Cool. Yeah, don't have a lot of options here, but
no, it's such a different store, like they just have, there's stuff that they can do that there's just no way we can bring in that depth of content,
And I know I wouldn't expect customers to think about that when they come in or realize it. You see it a lot more at Christmas when people are asking for like super specific kind of books. And I'm like, I just don't have the space to
But I think
that breadth.
Right. And it gets back to what we were talking about. Like, I think there are a lot of people, and I do this, like I want to give a specific book that I have read to a specific person right now, right? Oh, hey, this 18-year-old, I want to give them On the Road or whatever it happens to be. And so you go into a bookstore looking for that book, you're not going to find it as much in, our bookstore, which is for like right now. But I think we serve different purposes.
Yeah. I had there was a family in right before Christmas, and they wanted to bring a picture book that they had read, when they were raising kids 20 years ago, which is so tough, where I'm always like, okay, we do have Make Way for Ducklings. And we do have, a handful of books.
Blueberries for Sal.
Yeah. And they were like, do you have the Tub People? And I was like, I actually have never even heard of that book.
The Tub People. How do we not have that?
You don't have the Tub People? It was hilarious. And I did go look it up. And I think it was published in 83 or something,
Well, it is fun.
But it's still in print. So I was like, okay, maybe. I don't know.
We just moved a bunch of our kids' books off of prominent bookshelves because we wanted to put other books there.
Yeah.
And there are definitely books that we read a million times that I think were just obscure books that we happened to come across.
Totally.
They weren't popular necessarily. It's just someone gave it to us and the kids loved it.
Yeah. There are a lot of rando books out there.
Which is a good thing.
It is. It's great.
Yeah, I talk about it online a lot. I mean, there's 30 books that get all the attention of reviews and people writing about it. Then you go look at the books that we sell, and on most days we only sell one copy of every book that we sell. It's very rare that we sell multiple copies of a single book because there are just so many books out there that appeal to people.
I know. I was thinking there was a biography of Katharine White, E.B. White's mother, who was an editor at the New Yorker for many years.
E.B. White's mom was an editor at the New Yorker? What?
No, not E.B. White's mom. His wife, I guess. Sorry, Roger Angel's. It was Roger Angel's mother. Anyway, sorry, now I'm getting confused.
Roger Angel is E.B. White's son?
Right?
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Is that real?
I think that's real.
Wow.
I think he was married to Katharine White, and then I think they divorced, and she married somebody else, if I'm remembering correctly.
No idea.
Anyway, this biography of Katharine White, it was about her time at the New Yorker. And I think we sold 5 copies, which
really?
I was like, that's pretty good. But I just feel I kept thinking, I kept putting it out on the table. So I was like, I feel like we're in a community of people who like old school New Yorker.
Right.
Even don't even necessarily still read it, but just like the idea of
John Updike.
New Yorker. Yeah. And so I just kept putting it on the table, and it just kept selling, and I'd order another one, and it would just keep selling.
Nice.
And I just think that's a kind of a random book where I didn't order 5 out of the gate because I didn't necessarily anticipate this is going to be a big book for us, but it was just kind of one of those solid, whatever.
I know.
You just never know.
It's going to catch on.
You never know.
Every book is new to the person that just discovered it, even if it's been written 20 years ago. That's what, that's why it's so hard. It's
right.
If we just brought in random books with pretty covers and knew all about them and hand sold all of them, would there be any difference between that and all the new bestsellers? There probably would, because people do come.
Yes, people do come in looking for specific books.
But the big top ones you got to have, James. Right.
But then there are definitely those that you don't know are going to be the buzzed about books.
Yeah. Actually, I felt smart. Maybe a lot of people are doing this, but the audience section of the Portland Press Herald asks a bunch of local literary types what their favorite books of 2024 were, and someone picked Ministry of Time.
Awesome.
Yeah. Which I feel like, we were
I feel
on
like
top
that
of
book, we were definitely on top of it. And I feel like that book was like, and it was a bestseller for a while. Like it was on the New York Times bestseller list for a while. But it penetrated consciousness. Like people
I feel like we
called
it. You called it.
Thank you.
Yeah, you called it. I had that ARC. You had that ARC like 18 months ago or something crazy.
I did. We had it early.
All right.
Anyway,
so yes, we have
rambling.
reached the end of our agenda. We're chit-chatting. We don't have any events on the schedule at the moment, but we
really
don't. Which it's January. We're not going to do anything interesting in January. We are going to inventory our bookstore. For anybody who is curious about the state of bookstores in America, we know nothing about it, but I will say that we're like 10% up on top line revenue. So Hannah has done a great job of getting people buying books in the shop, and things are.
If you want to see us take
great.
Inventory, you should stop in on Thursday. Oh, yeah, right when this comes out.
Exactly. Yeah, swing right in. You'll be able to hear.
Swing right in.
Beep, beep.
Be so annoying.
It's so annoying. I remember last year we were doing inventory, like everybody came in. I'm like, I'm so sorry, I have to keep beeping.
I think there's a way to turn it off. If I can just figure it out.
Oh, maybe. I don't know. It's like it's the sort of
I think
thing
you can plug headphones in to the laptop.
Oh yeah, you could.
That's
it's the sort of thing
idea.
that drives me insane personally.
Yeah.
It's something that is reliably going to cause me to be insane is something that is like almost on the beat, but is not actually on a beat.
No.
Like when I was in the hospital recently, and there are many things beeping, and I was like, "There's no rhythm to these beeps," and it was very, very frustrating. All right, so next time we speak to you, it will be from the future in 2025. But thank you for another great year of John Updike's Ghost, episode 83. Who thought we would ever make it this far? Not
amazing.
Me. It is amazing.
So
we'll see y'all later, everybody.
Bye.